7:15 in the evening. The stainless steel of my kitchen hummed with the nervous energy of grand opening night. Every station was prepped, every glass polished. But in the center of the dining room, table 1 sat empty. It was the best seat in the house, reserved for the Douglas family. My phone vibrated against the metal pass. A single text from my mother, Catherine. We cannot make it. Grayson's golf celebration ran long and he needs the support right now. We will try for next week. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I walked out to the floor, picked up the heavy brass reserved sign, and slid it into my apron pocket. The table was open. And my family was gone. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The ticket machine on the pass chattered to life, spitting out the first orders of the night. The sound was a starter pistol. My hands moved before my brain needed to command them. Plate down. Sauce swipe. Microgreens. Service. For the next 4 hours I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was a conductor of controlled chaos. But every time I turned to the window to expedite a dish, my eyes flickered to table 1. It remained a void in the bustling room, a silent accusation. I looked down at my forearms as I plated a scallop dish. They are a map of violence. There is a star-shaped scar near my elbow from a splash of 300-degree oil during a dinner rush in 2018. There is a faint white line across my wrist from a slip with a boning knife when I was working double shifts to pay for culinary school. These aren't injuries. They are receipts. They are the proof of purchase for the life I have built. 10 years. That is the cost. While my brother Grayson was building his brand by taking photos of latte art and borrowing money from our parents for trips to Tulum, I was in the basement of a French bistro, peeling 50 pounds of potatoes until my fingers bled. I missed every Thanksgiving for a decade because that is the busiest time of the year. I missed Christmas mornings because I was prepping stocks that needed 24 hours to reduce. I traded my youth, my sleep, and my comfort for the skills that built this restaurant. And they knew it. Or they should have known it. I had sent the invitations 3 months ago. I had framed them in heavy cardstock. I had texted reminders. I had called. I had structured the entire opening timeline around their availability. Grayson's text from earlier that day flashed in my mind. Bro, chill. It's just dinner. The golf club membership is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You cook every night. Just dinner. To them, food was something that appeared on a plate. It was content for Instagram. It was a status symbol. They had no concept of the heat of the line. They didn't understand that what I was serving tonight wasn't just food. It was my survival. Every dish that left my pass was a testament to the fact that I hadn't quit when the chefs screamed, when the loans piled up, when the burns blistered. I looked out at the dining room. Strangers were eating my food. A couple in the corner was closing their eyes as they tasted the truffle risotto. A critic from the Tribune was taking notes with a small smile. These people who owed me nothing were giving me everything. They were witnessing me. My family was 5 miles away, likely sitting on a patio at the country club, toasting to Grayson's ability to walk into a room and be handed a membership he didn't earn. They were celebrating potential while ignoring realized achievement. They chose the shiny, hollow facade of my brother over the gritty, hard-won reality of my work. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak. Heartbreak is hot and messy. This was cold. It was the feeling of a fever breaking. I realized I had been cooking for ghosts. I had spent 10 years trying to plate a dish perfect enough to make them look up from Grayson's latest selfie. I wiped the rim of a plate with a pristine towel. Perfect. I rang the bell. Service, I called out, my voice steady and sharp. The waiter took the plate. I watched it go. They weren't just late. They weren't coming. And for the first time in my life I realized that the table looked better empty. The morning sun hit my face like a spotlight, but it didn't bring warmth. It just illuminated the dust motes dancing in my apartment, the only things moving in a world that felt strangely still. I sat up, my body aching with the specific bone-deep fatigue that comes after a 14-hour shift. My hands were stiff, curled into claws from gripping tongs and knife handles. I flexed them, watching the tendons jump. These hands had built a legacy in one night. I reached for my phone. Not out of hope but out of habit. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, but none were the apologies I might have expected in a different life. There was a text from my sister, Victoria. It had come in at 3 in the morning. You are being incredibly dramatic, Clara. Leaving that table empty all night was passive-aggressive and embarrassing. Grayson just got into the club. It is a huge networking opportunity for his brand. You cook every night, you can do it anytime. Stop making everything about you. I read it twice. The words didn't sting, they clarified. In Victoria's world, my career was a hobby, a repetitive chore like doing laundry. You cook every night. As if creating a menu that had critics weeping was the same as making a grilled cheese sandwich. To her, the work was the networking, the photos, the appearance of success. The actual labor was invisible. Then I opened Instagram. The algorithm, cruel and efficient, served up my mother's post immediately. It was a photo taken on the patio of the country club. My brother Grayson was in the center holding a glass of scotch, wearing a blazer that cost more than my first car. My parents were beaming on either side of him, their faces flushed with wine and pride. The caption read, "Celebrating our boy. Big things coming. Family always comes first. #priorities. #proud mom. #priorities. I stared at the tag. It wasn't a slip of the finger. It was a declaration. For years I had asked myself the same question over and over, usually while scrubbing burnt fond off a pot at 2 in the morning. Why? Why did they celebrate Grayson's mediocrity while ignoring my excellence? Why was his third attempt at a lifestyle brand treated like a Nobel Prize, while my executive chef title was treated like a blue-collar inconvenience? Suddenly the answer clicked into place. It wasn't because they didn't understand what I did. It was because they understood it perfectly. This is the mechanism of the scapegoat. In a family built on image and superficiality, the person who works hard is a threat. My success wasn't just a victory for me. It was an indictment of them. Every time I showed them a burn scar, every time I mentioned a 16-hour shift, I was holding up a mirror. I was showing them what real achievement costs. Grayson was the golden child because he was a reflection of their own vanity. He was easy. He required money and applause, but he never required them to look at the ugly, unglamorous reality of effort. He allowed them to pretend that success is something you buy or network your way into. I was the black sheep not because I was bad, but because I was the truth teller. My existence proved that they were hollow. If they acknowledged my success, they would have to admit that Grayson was a fraud. They would have to admit that they were lazy. And to a narcissist, that reality is intolerable. So they had to erase me. They had to minimize my work to just cooking to keep their delusion safe. They didn't skip my opening because they were busy. They skipped it because my restaurant was a monument to everything they lacked. I looked at the photo again. The smiles. The scotch. The hashtag. It wasn't an insult anymore. It was data. It was a diagnostic report on a terminal illness. I didn't feel sad. Sadness implies a loss and you cannot lose something you never had. I felt the cold, sharp precision of a blade being honed. They had made their choice public. They had labeled their neglect as a priority. I swiped the app closed. I didn't reply to Victoria. I didn't comment on the photo. I didn't call my mother to beg for an explanation. I got out of bed and walked to my desk. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. If I was just a cook to them, then I would stop trying to be a daughter. I would treat this relationship with the same ruthless efficiency I applied to food cost analysis. They were a bad investment, a bleeding asset, and it was time to cut the losses. I didn't reply to the texts. I didn't answer the calls. I treated their communication attempts like spam emails, noise to be filtered out so the real work could continue. By 10 o'clock in the morning, I was seated in the glass-walled office of my accountant, David. The air smelled of espresso and laser printer toner. It was a clean, neutral scent that calmed me. We need to restructure the LLC, I told him, sliding a folder across the mahogany desk. I want to make sure the ownership is bulletproof. Sole proprietorship. No silent partners, no familial loopholes. I want a firewall between my business and my personal liabilities. David adjusted his glasses, scrolling through the digital files on his screen. We can do that. But to consolidate everything, I need to trace the initial capitalization again. Just to be sure we have the paper trail for the loan interest deductions. I nodded. I had brought everything. Every pay stub from the bistro, every scholarship letter, every loan agreement I had signed with a shaking hand at 18. I had built this life on a foundation of debt and sweat equity. I had nothing to hide. I have the student loan records here, I said, pulling out a stack of papers. And the small business loan for the kitchen equipment. David took them, humming a low, efficient note as he cross-referenced the dates. Then he paused. He frowned, typing something into his keyboard. He clicked, waited, and clicked again. Clara, he said slowly. You mentioned you took out the full Stafford loans for culinary school because there were no family assets available, correct? Correct. My parents said money was tight. The real estate market was down. David turned his monitor toward me. I'm looking at the old tax filings for the family trust your grandmother, Eleanor, set up. You were listed as a beneficiary until 4 years ago. I froze. I know Grandma left something, but my father told me it was emptied by market corrections before I turned 18. It wasn't the market, David said, his voice devoid of emotion, just stating facts. It was a transfer. A single withdrawal of $85,000. Dated 4 years ago. June 12th. June 12th. The date hit me like a physical blow. I didn't need to check my calendar. I knew exactly what happened on June 12th 4 years ago. That was the day Grayson launched his lifestyle brand. It was the day he rented a yacht on Lake Michigan for a party that cost more than my tuition. It was the day he put a down payment on his loft. It was the day my parents bought him his membership to the Oakwood Club as a networking investment. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and lucid. Who authorized the transfer? I asked. Your father as the trustee. The memo line says, Educational and Advancement Expense, Grayson. The room went silent. The hum of the server in the corner seemed to grow louder. They hadn't just neglected me. They hadn't just overlooked me. They had stolen from me. I sat there staring at the glowing numbers on the screen. $85,000. That was my culinary school tuition. That was the capital I had scraped together by working double shifts for 7 years. That was the down payment on a house I didn't have. Grandmother Eleanor had left that money for me. She had tasted my first attempt at a beurre blanc when I was 12 and told me I had magic hands. She had wanted to secure my future. And my parents had liquidated her legacy to pay for Grayson's bar tab. They had looked me in the eye, watched me sign loan documents with 8% interest, watched me work until my feet bled and told me there was no money. They had let me drown in debt so their golden child could float on a yacht. This wasn't favoritism. This was embezzlement. The last thread of guilt I felt for missing their phone calls snapped. It withered and died instantly. You don't feel guilty for cutting off a thief. You don't apologize to the person who robbed you. Clara, David asked gently. Do you want to pursue this legally? This is misappropriation of funds. I looked at the ledger. I looked at the name Grayson, next to the money that should have been mine. No, I said. My voice sounded different to my own ears. Deeper. Harder. A lawsuit is messy. It drags on. It keeps us connected. I stood up and smoothed the front of my chef's jacket, which I hadn't bothered to change out of. I liked wearing it. It was the only thing in my life that was honest. I don't want the money, David. I want the separation. Lock down the restaurant. Make sure they can never touch a dime of what I earn from today forward. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city looked sharp, made of steel and glass. I felt like I was made of the same stuff now. And David, I said, turning back, I need you to prepare a different kind of document for me. What kind? I need to file a petition with the court, I said. I'm done being a Douglas. That name is a debt I'm no longer paying. The Cook County Circuit Court smells of floor wax and quiet desperation. It is a place where lives are dismantled and reassembled in triplicate. I stood in line at the Chancery Division, holding a manila envelope that contained my birth certificate, my social security card, and a check for the filing fee. I wasn't here to sue for the $85,000. A lawsuit is an invitation to a conversation. It requires depositions, mediation, arguments. It requires me to look my father in the eye and ask why. And I didn't want to know why. I didn't want their excuses. I didn't want their narrative. I wanted silence. When people talk about cutting off family, they use words like war or attack. They say, she turned against them. But standing there under the fluorescent lights, watching the digital number counter tick upward, I realized how wrong that framing is. This wasn't an act of war. It was an act of surgery. When a limb becomes gangrenous, the body doesn't hate the limb. The body remembers when that limb was healthy, when it helped you walk or hold things. But the body also knows the truth of the infection. It knows that if it tries to keep the dying part attached out of nostalgia or obligation, the poison will spread. It will stop the heart. Amputation isn't violence. It is the most aggressive form of self-preservation there is. It is the decision to survive, even if it means there is less of you than there was before. Next, the clerk called out. She didn't look up from her monitor. I walked to the window. I'm filing a petition for a change of name. Adult or minor? Adult. She slid a clipboard under the glass partition. Fill this out. Reason for change. I looked at the blank line. Reason. Because they stole my future to buy a country club membership? Because they forgot my existence until they needed a prop for a photo? Because my last name felt like wearing a coat that was 2 sizes too small and covered in grease stains? I wrote a single word. Personal. Then I moved to the section that mattered. Current name, Clara Douglas. I looked at Douglas. It was my father's name. It was the name on the trust fund that was emptied. It was the name on the student loans I was still paying off. It was the name of a man who looked at his daughter's exhaustion and saw only a lack of gratitude. Proposed name, Clara Eleanor. Eleanor. My grandmother. The woman who taught me that a recipe is a contract between the cook and the eater. A promise of care. She was the only one who had ever tasted my food and closed her eyes to savor it, rather than reaching for the salt before tasting. She had left me the means to build a life, and even though they had stolen the capital, they couldn't steal the craft she had nurtured. Taking her name wasn't just a tribute, it was a correction. I was aligning my identity with my source code. I signed the bottom of the page. The pen scratched loudly against the paper. It was the sound of a heavy door locking shut. I slid the clipboard back. The clerk stamped it. Clack clack. You'll get a court date in the mail, she said, already reaching for the next file. Once the decree is signed, you have 30 days to update your social security and license. Thank you. I walked out of the courthouse and into the Chicago wind. It whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't brush it away. I felt lighter. Physically lighter. The $85,000 was gone. I would never see it again. But by walking away from it, by refusing to fight for it, I had bought something far more valuable. I had bought my autonomy. If I had sued, I would still be Clara Douglas, the daughter who is angry about the money. I would be defined by my grievance. By changing my name, I became Clara Eleanor, the woman who owes them nothing. I checked my phone. A text from Grayson. Mom is freaking out that you blocked her. What is your problem? It's been 3 days. Get over it. I looked at the name Grayson on the screen. Felt like looking at a stranger. A character in a book I had finished reading. I didn't block him. I didn't reply. I simply opened my contacts, selected delete contact, and confirmed. Then I did the same for my parents. I hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. The restaurant, I said. I have a menu to rewrite. The surgery was complete. The wound would scar certainly, but the infection was gone. And for the first time in years, the blood pumping through my veins belonged entirely to me. 3 months later, Chicago was frozen solid, but Lubli was burning. A 2-page spread in the Tribune had called my menu, the most honest food in the city, and the whispers about a Michelin star had started to circulate like smoke. We were booked solid for 6 months. The phone never stopped ringing. Success, I learned, is the best form of soundproofing. I couldn't hear the silence of my estranged family over the roar of a full dining room. Then on a Tuesday night the soundproofing cracked. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. Peak service. I was expediting, calling out orders when my sous chef Marcus touched my shoulder. Chef, there's a situation at the host stand. Maya needs you. I wiped my hands and walked out to the front of house. The air in the dining room was warm, smelling of roasted garlic and thyme. But at the entrance the air was frigid. There they were. My mother, Catherine, draped in a fur coat that looked too heavy for her. My father, Douglas, looking impatient, checking his watch. Victoria scrolling on her phone. And Grayson. He was holding his phone up, live streaming, panning the camera around my restaurant like he owned the deed. They had bypassed the line of people waiting in the vestibule. They were standing right at the host stand, looming over Maya, my 19-year-old hostess. We don't need a reservation, Grayson was saying, his voice loud enough to turn heads. I'm the owner's brother. It's my birthday. We're just going to grab the owner's table. Table 1, right? Maya looked terrified. She scanned her iPad. Sir, I'm sorry, table 1 is seated. And I don't have a Clara Douglas listed as the owner. Don't be ridiculous, my mother snapped. Just go get her. Tell her family is here. I stepped into the light. I was wearing my executive chef's coat, pristine white, buttoned to the throat. Felt like plate mail. I didn't smile. I didn't rush to hug them. I stood with my hands clasped behind my back watching them. Clara. Grayson shouted, lowering his phone but keeping it recording. Finally. Tell this girl who we are. We need a table for 6. I promised my followers a behind-the-scenes look at the family empire. The family empire. The audacity was almost impressive. They stole my tuition, ignored my opening, and now that the world was watching they wanted to claim the architecture. They wanted to stand in the light they had tried to extinguish. Maya is correct, I said. My voice was low, but in the sudden hush of the entryway it carried. There is no Clara Douglas here. My father stepped forward, his face darkening. Claire, stop this game. It's your brother's birthday. We're here to celebrate. We're willing to overlook your absence these past few months. Willing to overlook, I repeated. You're willing to overlook the fact that you stole $85,000 from me? You're willing to overlook that I changed my name to escape you? The color drained from my mother's face. Clara, keep your voice down. No. I took a step closer. I looked at Grayson, then at Victoria, then at my parents. I looked at them not as family, but as strangers who had wandered into the wrong building. This restaurant is owned by Clara Eleanor, I said, enunciating every syllable. Clara Douglas doesn't exist. You killed her when you emptied her trust fund to buy a golf membership. You killed her when you chose a country club party over her life's work. Grayson laughed, a nervous, stuttering sound. Okay, point made. You're mad. We get it. But seriously, can we get a table? I have people waiting for this content. I looked past him to table 1. It was occupied by my staff, 3 dishwashers and a line cook having their family meal before the late rush. They were eating, laughing, safe. They were the people who helped me scrub the floors at 2 in the morning. They were the people who respected the work. Table 1 is taken, I said coldly. And we are fully booked. For tonight? Victoria asked, annoyed. Forever, I said. For you we are booked forever. You aren't guests here. You're trespassers. You can't ban your own family, my father sputtered. I'm your father. You were my father, I corrected. Now you're just a man who owes a debt he can't pay. Get out of my restaurant. I nodded to the security guard I had hired weeks ago, anticipating this exact moment. He stepped forward, large and silent. Grayson looked at his phone, realizing he was live-streaming his own eviction. He cut the feed, his face turning a blotchy red. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes. Performative, useless tears. Clara, please, she whispered. I didn't answer. I turned my back on them. I walked back toward the kitchen, toward the heat, toward the noise, toward the only home I had ever known. Behind me I heard the heavy oak door close, sealing them out in the cold. The fallout was immediate, loud, and entirely irrelevant. By the time the morning prep crew arrived the next day, my phone had logged 43 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. My family using burner phones, friends' phones, desperate to breach the wall I had built. Grayson tried to spin the narrative online, posting a tearful video about how fame changed his sister. But the internet is a ruthless place. The receipts of the stolen trust fund, which my accountant had quietly prepared just in case, made sure his story died before it could take a breath. They tried to sue, of course. A frantic, flailing attempt to claim familial rights to the business. But the documentation of the $85,000 they had embezzled acted like a sheer cliff face. They hit it, they broke, and they fell away. I didn't watch them fall. I was too busy looking forward. 6 months later, I stood in the unfinished shell of a building in Tribeca. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lubly, New York, was no longer a rumor. It was a construction schedule, a permit application, a reality. My phone buzzed. It wasn't a demand for money or a guilt trip. It was Marcus, my executive chef back in Chicago. Service is starting. We're fully booked. Maya says table 1 is seated with the regulars. Kitchen is flying. I smiled. I didn't need to be there. I had built a machine that ran on respect, not fear. I had built a culture where people were paid what they were worth, where talent was nurtured, not exploited. I looked around the empty space in New York. This wasn't just a second location. It was proof that my success wasn't a fluke. It wasn't dependent on their approval, their network, or their name. I had built an empire on the ashes of the bridge I burned. That night, I flew back to Chicago for a final service before the New York launch. The kitchen was in that perfect rhythmic flow. The clatter of pans, the hiss of searing meat, the call and response of "Oui, chef." I stood at the pass, plating the final course for a tasting menu. It was a simple dish. A single, perfect scallop, seared hard, resting in a pool of saffron reduction. No microgreens hiding mistakes. No foam distracting from the technique. Just 3 ingredients executed flawlessly. I looked at the plate. It was honest. It was exactly what it claimed to be. I looked up at my line. Marcus was laughing with the guard manger. Maya was at the pass stealing a French fry. They were tired, they were sweating, and they were happy. They knew I had their backs. They knew that if they burned a hand I would be the first one with the burn gel. They knew that if they succeeded I would celebrate them, not steal their credit. This was family. Family isn't whose blood runs in your veins. It's whose blood you would bleed for. It's the people who respect the work. I wiped the rim of the plate. I didn't feel the phantom weight of the Douglas name anymore. I didn't feel the need to prove anything to the ghosts of Catherine, Douglas, or Grayson. They were just people I used to know, strangers who had once occupied a table they couldn't afford. I rang the bell. Service. The waiter took the plate. I watched it go out into the dining room, into the hum of conversation and life. People often ask me if I regret it. They ask if the silence is lonely. They ask if I miss the holidays, the birthdays, the shared history. I take a breath. I inhale the scent of roasting garlic, of lemon zest, of clean steel. The silence isn't lonely. It's delicious. It tastes like freedom. It tastes like the first breath of air after being underwater for 30 years. I walked out the back door into the cool Chicago night. I checked my phone one last time. No missed calls. No drama. Just the notifications of reservation requests rolling in, one after another. I pocketed the phone and walked toward the train. I had a restaurant to open in New York. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't hungry for anything. If you've ever had to surgically remove someone from your life to save your own peace, share this story. You aren't alone.